It is already week 5 of college football. Yes, this thing always goes by way too fast, but is your team still alive? Is there still something to be fighting for with your squad? I hope so. But this weekend is going to tell us a lot about a lot of teams because we have a lot of high profile matchups coming up. Yes, conference games are upon us all the way through now. We are getting great matchups going forward, and this weekend is no exception. Probably the best weekend as far as the depth of the card is concerned. There are just so many solid games. So in this video, I'm changing things up. We're just going to preview the games on the weekend because there's so much to talk about with these games. But for this video, we're going to go over your team's game. So let's get into it. We're going to start things off with the big one, the college game day location, Clemson, South Carolina. North Carolina State comes into Clemson. Clemson has not lost at Clemson since 2016, I believe. It's been an absolute fortress. They're coming off of an emotional road win versus Wake Forest. They were in a shootout. The game went to overtime. Clemson came out on top. North Carolina State has not really been challenged too much this season. Their toughest game has been a home matchup versus Texas Tech, a game in which they were able to jump out in front and hold Texas Tech off for the rest of the game. They are quarterbacked by Devin Leary, who had some pretty good expectations going into the year. Now, he's been good, but he hasn't reached the ceiling that many NC State fans had probably hoped for. But their defense has been solid. They've only given up 20 points once. That was against East Carolina, their only road matchup of the year thus far, and that game was very scary for NC State. They almost dropped that one on the road to an inferior opponent. You know, week 1 games, how much stock do you put in them? I don't know. That's on you. Some teams develop, some teams regress, some teams progress from that game, but that is on their resume, a narrow road win at East Carolina. And of course, Clemson coming off of the big win, as I just suggested. It's going to be an interesting game because NC State's been holding teams down under 20. Clemson found themselves in a shootout last week. And the thing with Clemson is the big question mark coming into the year has been the offense. But the offense is starting to put up points, although it's not been pretty. They're putting up points. It's the defense that's been a little bit head-scratching. They're giving up big plays in the secondary. The front seven's good, but maybe not as good as they had hoped. What's going to give? Is NC State going to find that rhythm on offense they've been searching for? Is their defense going to hold up? Is Clemson's offense going to keep improving? Is Clemson's defense going to finally take that step forward where people thought they'd be starting at this year? It's a very intriguing matchup, but I do think the game being at home. Oh, and I have not addressed the rain cloud on your screen. This game is going to be affected by the hurricane, apparently. That Hurricane Ian is rolling into Florida as we speak right now on Wednesday. That will have an effect on this game. How much, I don't know. Those things tend to be in flux. So that could be a huge factor in this game. I think Clemson is an absolute fortress at home. I think North Carolina State, you're 4 games in. I mean, what are you? Your offense has not been explosive. Your defense has been good, but your offense has not been what you hoped it would be. I think Clemson has just a lot more room to improve on defense than NC State does on offense. And I think both teams, even if they take steps forward this week, I think if both teams do that, Clemson still comes out on top. So yeah, I'm going with Clemson on the win, and I do have them covering as a best bet. Now, bet with caution on this one because the rain clouds could play a huge factor in this game. I don't know which side that really benefits more, but I do think that the home field advantage, the improving offense, and the potential on that Clemson defense proves to be too much for NC State. I think Clemson holds down the fort at home. Big 12 matchup, Oklahoma State at the Baylor Bears. Oklahoma State been putting up crazy numbers all year, but not really played any tough opposition. I think their toughest game has been Central Michigan, while Baylor has already suffered a loss on the year, surprisingly, to BYU on the road, though. Really weird place to play at Provo. It was a late game. BYU's fielding a new quarterback, and Oklahoma State has the same old song and dance in their quarterback in Spencer Sanders, who's just been absolutely ridiculous in terms of putting up numbers this season. I do believe Baylor's defense is quite formidable. They have given up over 20 points twice this season, once on the road at BYU. They gave up 20 there, and then they gave up 24 to Iowa State last week, though that was a tough road environment to play in, and they gave up that last touchdown late. Baylor was the better team last week versus at Iowa State, where they covered, which was one of our best bets last week. Will Baylor be able to hold down this Oklahoma State offense at home? That is a tough, tall task to order, but I think they can do it. Oklahoma State has not had the toughest opposition this year. Yes, this offense has been great, but who's it been against? Arizona State, Pine Bluff, Central Michigan. They've already had a bye week. I mean, I just don't think that it's necessarily real yet. Now, they could make it real this weekend with a great performance, but is Spencer Sanders going to go into Baylor and just tear it up against a solid, well-coached Baylor defense? I think not. I think Baylor wins this one, and it's not one of my best bets, but I would really consider taking Baylor and lay the 2.5 points. I think they can get it done at home, and I think if they're winning, it's going to be by at least a touchdown. So I'm going with Baylor with this one. Not a best bet, but consider betting it. And then we have a really good SEC matchup. Two teams that, aren't proven commodities just yet. Kentucky had that big win on the road at Florida, so they've had the road test. Ole Miss really hasn't played anybody, and both teams kind of were caught looking ahead last week, both teams getting in close matchups against subpar opponents. What gives here? Ole Miss has had a great running attack all year. The passing game has not really been as elite as what you would expect under a Lane Kiffin team. Jackson Dart can put up numbers, but he does it with his legs, setting up the play action off of zone read. They have a three-headed monster in their running tandem. It's the quarterback and two running backs. Now, Zach Evans is questionable to play this weekend, and he is a huge, huge chunk of their offensive production, especially with their passing game not being what you would expect. I do like Kentucky in this game because they have shown that they can travel and score and win on the road at hostile environments. Ole Miss has had trouble filling up their stadium this year. Now, I don't think they'll have trouble this weekend, but I do think that road win over Florida early in the year is going to be a factor that helps Kentucky in this matchup. And Ole Miss hasn't played anybody. I know that's like they can't help that. Kentucky has gone and won on the road. They have stopped an offense on the road. They held Florida to 16 points on the road. They haven't played anybody tough besides them. I mean, Northern Illinois, they have a decent program. Kentucky was caught looking ahead last week, or maybe they just struggled. But Ole Miss struggled as well last week against Tulsa. So it's a very tough game to call. But as I mentioned, I am leaning Kentucky. I'm definitely not betting this game. That line is huge, surprisingly. It's kind of a weird line. I mean, I don't know what Ole Miss has done to prove that they're a touchdown better than Kentucky. Maybe if you're going to bet this one, you lean Kentucky plus points, because I have Kentucky winning this game. Maybe I'm putting too much stock into that Florida game. But I think it's going to be a factor because this Ole Miss team is by no means done anything that impressive yet. Now, if they go out and beat Kentucky, yeah, Ole Miss is legit with their body of work and then leading with this Kentucky win. But I haven't seen it yet, and with Zach Evans potentially sitting this game, it sounds like that's a very, very high likelihood of happening. I have Kentucky winning. Now, my popcorn game of the week, the best game of the week that you're going to want to prioritize on your viewing situation. You want this one on the big screen. If you have a laptop here, a phone here, and the big screen right here, you want this one on the big screen. It's a very interesting road test for Alabama, who struggled on the road this year and pretty much all season last season. This Alabama team, they've been finding themselves time and time again in close, down-to-the-wire matchups on the road. Arkansas coming off of a very emotional, gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching loss last week versus Texas A&M. My Aggies. What is their level of rabidness? How much is wounded animal mode going to affect Arkansas against this Alabama defense and offensive attack? The Alabama defense has a solid front seven, probably best in the country, with two of the best defensive players in the country, and Arkansas likes to run. It's another weird style of matchups, matchups of styles, whatever you want to call it. But it's a running attack going up against an elite front seven. I don't know how that matchup goes for Arkansas. It doesn't seem like it's going to go that well unless the execution is just perfect and blockers are getting in the right place the whole game, no whiffs. It's a totally crisp matchup because you have no room for error against this Alabama front seven with that style attack that you opt to go for. Now, Alabama's Bryce Young centered offense, I don't know how else to put this. He is the offense right now. And yeah, they have a good running back, but he's not a power back. He's not an every down kind of back. Every down back, quote unquote, in Jahmyr Gibbs. He's a guy that can affect the passing game, and they're going to spread it out to a plethora of receivers. They don't have that one go-to guy that they're used to having. They have a stable of receivers against an Arkansas secondary that has been quite suspect, though is getting healthy and should be improving, and is definitely not as bad as 131st in yards given up might indicate. It's a bad stylistic matchup for Arkansas, but it's a good Arkansas team. This Arkansas team is solid, and they haven't really put a clean game together just yet. Alabama has a way of bringing things out of teams. They have a way, they're everybody's Super Bowl. Alabama comes to town, you're going to get up for it. You're going to play your best game. I mean, look at Texas A&M last year. Look at Texas this year. Look at Auburn almost every year. Look at LSU many years, even last year. Alabama brings things out of teams. And then Arkansas being in wounded animal mode. I think this game is closer than the experts think. I think it's a best bet to take Arkansas plus 17 points. I think they keep it close, but I do think Alabama wins by a touchdown to 2 touchdowns. I think Alabama keeps a steady lead through this game, but I don't think they pull away. I think wounded animal mode and Arkansas maybe executing a little bit better than they have the last couple of weeks is going to be a factor in keeping this game close. But I just think the stylistic matchup makes it too much for Arkansas to overcome. And we're going to be saying roll tide yet again. But that environment's going to be epic. Coming off that tough loss, Alabama coming to town. They almost beat Bama last year on the road. Arkansas Stadium is going to be absolutely rocking. I mean, it's going to be crazy. Check this game out. It's going to be super fun. Few quick hitters for y'all. There are so many good games this week. I had to add this segment into the video. There are just a bunch of cool matchups that I want to just touch on. I'm not going to go too in-depth in any of these, but I want to just touch on all of these. OU coming off that upset loss at home to Kansas State. It seems like Kansas State has some real estate in Norman, Oklahoma these days. Against a TCU team who's already taken a bye, but has been gliding under the radar all year, looking good. I think it's a weird situation for OU. They struggled against their 2 cupcake teams to start the year. They go on the road and destroy Nebraska, which in hindsight, after losing to Kansas State, what does that even mean? I talked that win up as if going on the road and beating any Power 5 team that way was huge. Maybe Nebraska is really that bad, and maybe OU is really not that good. I think OU is going to drop this game on the road to TCU. I think TCU is a game, it's a weird place because OU just lost. Can you have a trap game after a loss? Probably not. But traveling to TCU, are they going thinking they're going to go make right at TCU just like that and get things done? I hope they're not thinking that way because I think TCU is a severely underrated team, and I think they're going to catch OU this week. You got Michigan on the road at Iowa. Michigan was tested for the first time all season last week at home versus an undefeated Maryland. They were able to pull away at the end. Iowa cannot score points to save their lives. They have the infamous 7-5 game, I think it was, where they scored the most unlikely 7 points ever. It was 2 safeties and a field goal. They were able to put up 20-plus the last 2 weeks against Nevada and Rutgers, though. Michigan's been a high-scoring offense. McCarthy is going in as his 3rd week starting. I think he's the real deal as a quarterback for Michigan. He looks really good, and he'll tell you he didn't have a good game against Maryland. But a lot of that he's putting up to getting healthy, which is ironic. But he's thinking he's getting his arm strength back. He's getting into the flow of things. He's learning to gauge this offense. But you can see the tools are there with McCarthy. Corum's one of the best running backs in the country. I think Michigan goes on the road and does enough to cover at Iowa, and I think that they're not going to have too much trouble slowing this Iowa offense down with an improving Michigan defense. Then we have Wake Forest at Florida State. As I mentioned before, Wake Forest, like Clemson, is coming off a very emotional game. And for them coming off an emotional game at home, all the pressure of the fans watching, the heartbreak of defeat in overtime after getting so close to beating Clemson, the big dog in the conference, I think there's going to be a hangover this week against a cruising Florida State team. Who would have seen this turnaround coming from Florida State? Just beating teams left and right, beating an SEC team, winning on the road at a Friday night matchup at Louisville, which can never be an easy thing to do, especially against a dynamic quarterback, and then blowing out the cupcake they're supposed to blow out last week leading into this game. No getting caught looking ahead, nothing like that. And the game's at Florida State. Yeah, I have Florida State covering this game. I have Florida State winning by a couple touchdowns this game. I don't think Wake Forest looks as good as they looked in the second half versus Clemson. And in the battle of recent upsetters, Texas Tech on the road at Kansas State. Texas Tech coming off that home overtime win versus Texas where they stormed the field, embarrassingly so. But hey, what else are you going to do? It's Lubbock. And then Kansas State, I think, is a legit team who got caught looking ahead at OU the week before. And I think what we saw versus OU, where they pretty much handled Oklahoma. Oklahoma had a late touchdown, but Kansas State handled OU at home. I think Kansas State is the absolute real deal with Adrian Martinez as their, Heisman contending quarterback out of nowhere. I mean, he leaves Nebraska and he's this. I think Kansas State is going to get this win and cover at home. I think Texas Tech is a few years away from being where they could be with their new coach. I got Kansas State winning this one big. But that's it, guys. Those are the games I wanted to touch on this week. What are your biggest games of the week? What are your biggest upsets of the week? Do you have any crazy upsets that even I didn't mention? Do you think that TCU game is upset alert city for OU like I do? I think OU's losing this week, and I think they're dropping 2 in a row, and the Brent Venables era is kicking off with a sputter. So thanks for being here. If you like this content, consider liking and subscribing, and check for my shorts where I hit more of the land of college football than I do on my videos. I'm typically an A&M channel, but I'm a huge college football fan. So check my shorts. Check out this video every week if you're not an Aggie. I might touch on your team. I love watching these games, and I love having you guys here. So comment, like, subscribe, do all that. Thanks for watching, guys.